For most of my life, I believed the soul was simple, a single essence, invisible, eternal, indivisible, like a flame inside the body that either flickers out or lives on. It was comforting to think that way, clean, manageable, one soul, one self. But then I came across a different idea, ancient, quiet, and at first, a little unsettling. The ancient Egyptians did not believe the soul was one thing. They believed it was many, 5, to be exact, each with its own role, its own purpose, its own journey. Ka, Ba, Yin, Shut, Ibi. They saw the self not as a single flame, but as a constellation, a sacred arrangement of energies, each holding a piece of your truth. And that changed something in me. It started, as most awakenings do, with discomfort. If the soul was many, then how many parts of me had I been ignoring? How often had I tried to fix a feeling without knowing which part of me was actually speaking? I remember lying awake one night after reading about Ka and Ba for the first time. The idea that one part of me might be seeking nourishment, while another was longing for flight. That my fatigue might not just be physical, but a sign my Ka was starved. That my sense of being trapped might not be circumstantial, but a call from my Ba to move, to dream, to rise. And I began to ask myself, what if this model was not primitive, but precise? What if the reason so many of us feel fragmented, burned out, confused, or disconnected is because we are trying to live as one thing, when we are, in truth, 5 layers, 5 voices, 5 sacred functions, not all of them visible, not all of them logical, but all of them necessary. Modern life has taught us to define ourselves in parts, but not the kind that nourish the soul. We speak of roles, career, gender, nationality, personality types, but none of that tells you what is happening in your Kai, or what your Shut is holding in the dark, or whether your Ren is being remembered. We are souls who have lost the blueprint of our own structure. And so, we run in circles, trying to heal what we do not fully understand. That is why I return to the Egyptians, not for superstition, but for structure, for a sacred language that could help me read my own inner world. And the more I studied, the more it began to make sense, not just intellectually, but intuitively. K, the vital essence, but the roaming soul, Ren, the name that carries identity, Shut, the shadow self, Ib, the heart, where truth is weighed. Together, they form the living system of who we are. And when one is forgotten, the whole becomes unstable. That was the moment of shift. The old image of a singular soul began to dissolve, and in its place, something richer appeared. A soul with depth, a soul with architecture, a soul with layers that speak, ashi, and awaken in different ways. And suddenly, I began to feel less lost. Because now, when I feel depleted, I do not just ask, what is wrong with me? I ask, which part of me is calling for attention? And that is the beginning of soul literacy, the ability to listen to the self in sacred detail. In the next part of this journey, we will begin decoding the first of these soul pieces, not as a metaphor, but as a vital energy that still lives within you. Let us begin with Ka, the twin of your life force, the one who stands beside you, unseen, but never unfelt. I did not know I had a twin, not a sibling, not someone who looked like me, but a twin made of breath, of vitality, of presence. The Egyptians called it Ka, and they believed it was born with you, not after your first breath, but the very moment life entered you. Ka is not your body, but it is your force, the part of you that animates the body, that gives you weight in the world. It eats with you, sleeps with you, and when you die, it does not vanish, it waits. That was the first thing that stunned me. Ka does not die when the body dies. It lingers, it needs to be fed. In ancient Egypt, food offerings were made not just for the deceased, but specifically for their Ka. Water, bread, wine set beside the tomb, nourishment for a life force that still existed, just in another layer of being. And that made me ask, what feeds my Ka now? Because if Ka still lives, then maybe exhaustion is not always just physical. Maybe burnout is not laziness. Maybe it is a starved Ka, a soul force that has not been tended to. I began to notice patterns, the times when I felt hollow, even when everything looked fine on the outside, the moments I collapsed inward, not from lack of sleep, but from lack of connection. Those were my Ka calling out, and I started to shift how I saw energy, not as something to manage, but something to honor. Ka is not just stamina, it is the sacred yes that pulses through your veins. It is what responds when you are aligned, and what recoils when you are not. I asked myself, when do I feel most alive? What conversations light me up? What environments deplete me instantly? Because those are not just preferences. They are signals. They are Ka speaking. In ancient tradition, Ka was also linked to your sense of purpose. It stood beside you like a mirror, a guide, and sometimes a warning. If you strayed too far from your integrity, your Ka would weaken, not in punishment, but as a form of inner truth. And that is something I think many of us feel today, that quiet drain that creeps in when we betray our deeper values just to survive the pace of the world. We keep going, but something essential dims. That is the cost of forgetting Ka. And yet, the path back is not complicated. It does not require temples or rituals. It requires presence. It asks us to feed what matters, to restore what has been depleted, to return to the body, not to dominate it, but to honor the force that animates it. Sometimes, I sit in silence now, hands resting on my chest, and I say quietly, I see you. I have not forgotten. Let me remember how to nourish you again. And something shifts, not dramatic, not loud, but real. Ka is not a concept, it is a companion. And when we return to it, we begin to return to ourselves. In the next part of this journey, we explore a different part of the soul, the one that knows how to move, how to dream, how to return to the body. After flying through other realms, let us meet Ba, the traveler of the soul, and the messenger between worlds. Sometimes, when I wake up from a dream, there is a feeling I cannot name. Not fear, not joy, just a strange sense that I have been somewhere else. As if another version of me had wandered off during the night and only just returned. As my eyes opened, I never had words for that experience until I met the concept of Ba. To the ancient Egyptians, Ba was not just a metaphor. It was you in motion, the part of your soul that could travel beyond the body, visit sacred places, speak with ancestors, and return. Ba was often depicted as a bird with a human head. It could fly, it could see, it could feel, but it never lost its identity. Even in motion, Ba was always you. That image stayed with me because I began to realize Ba is the part of us that knows how to move through memory, through emotion, through space itself. It is what allows us to enter deep reflection, to visit the past, not just as facts, but as felt experience. It is the part that dreams, that reaches, that drifts into visions we do not understand, and brings something back. I began to think about all the times I had dismissed those moments, the dreams that felt too vivid, the gut feelings that came out of nowhere, the flash of someone's face from my past, uninvited but undeniable. What if those were not distractions? What if they were Ba doing its work? In Egypt, it was believed that Ba left the body each night and returned before dawn. This was not symbolic. It was part of the soul's rhythm. And when someone died, Ba had to learn how to navigate the underworld, to fly through the gates of Duat and find its way to the field of reeds. But Ba could not do it alone. It needed spells, knowledge. It needed to remember who it was, so it would not get lost in illusion. That felt familiar. How often have I drifted into versions of myself that were not really me, saying yes when I meant no, becoming who someone else expected just to survive the moment? That is what happens when Bia is not grounded. It still moves, but without direction. And so, I started to listen more carefully. When I had a dream that lingered, I wrote it down. When a memory returned out of season, I sat with it instead of pushing it away. And when I felt the urge to be somewhere quiet, somewhere sacred, I honored that call, because I began to understand that be is not just about travel. It is about connection. It carries the thread between what we feel and what we do not yet understand. It is the bridge between the seen and the unseen. And when we give it space, when we honor its movements, we begin to live in deeper harmony with our intuition, our memory, and our mystery. The Egyptians believed that Ba would revisit the body each night so that the person could dream, heal, and return whole the next day. Perhaps that is something we have lost, the rhythm of returning to ourselves, not just in sleep, but in stillness, in ritual, in letting our deeper self wander without shame. Ba teaches us that the soul is not confined, it moves, and we must give it room to fly. In the next part of our journey, we explore what keeps that motion from dissolving, what gives the soul a center, a lasting name, a memory that holds through lifetimes. Let us now meet Ren, the name you carry in this world. And beyond it, there is something sacred about being called by name, not a title, not a role, not what you do, but who you are. I still remember the first time someone said my name, and it felt like they were not just speaking to my face, but to something behind it, to something older, quieter, truer. That is what the Egyptians understood, and that is why they gave such reverence to Ren. The name, to them, your Ren was not just a sound, it was a spiritual thread, a map, a marker, and above all, a form of survival. If your name was spoken, remembered, preserved, you continued. But if it was forgotten, so were you. That is why they carved names into tombs, why scrolls were written and statues inscribed, why stories were repeated for generations, because they believed as long as your Ren lived, so did your soul. And I began to ask myself, what is my Ren now? Is it just the name on my ID? The username I type into a login screen? Or is there something beneath that? A name not given by family or society, but discovered in the silence. A name made of essence, not letters. And then, the harder question, have I forgotten it? We live in a world full of noise. Algorithms name us by behavior. Corporations name us by status. Culture tells us to build a personal brand before we've even found a personal truth. And in the chase to be seen, so many of us go unseen. Even by ourselves, we abandon the inner name in exchange for a louder one. But Ren does not shout, it does not compete. It waits, and sometimes, in the quiet of reflection, it begins to return, not always as a word, sometimes as a feeling, a memory, a pull towards something you cannot yet explain. When I began reconnecting with this idea, I stopped thinking of identity as fixed. I started listening for the parts of me that had always been there, beneath the roles, beneath the wounds. I asked, what part of me has never changed? What truth within me refuses to die, no matter how I'm labeled? That, I believe, is the root of Ren, and it is fragile because it depends on remembrance, not just from others, but from ourselves. I think about all the times I've been in rooms where I didn't feel like myself, where I wore someone else's language, someone else's approval, just to belong. Those were the moments I was closest to losing my Ren. But it only takes one breath to begin remembering again. One act of alignment, one choice made from the core, one quiet yes to your own integrity, and the name begins to glow. you begin to feel like yourself again. Not the self you perform, but the self that simply is. In Egypt, Ren was tied to magic. To speak the true name of a thing was to hold power over it. So what happens when you remember your true name? What power returns? Perhaps this is why healing does not begin with achievement, but with calling yourself home, with whispering back the name you forgot to say for so long. In the next part of our journey, we turn toward what you cannot name, what lives just behind you, in the shadow you never see, but always feel. It is called Shiut, and it holds everything you have not yet faced. There is a part of you that always walks with you, but never in front. It does not speak, but it listens. It does not lead, but it knows. The Egyptians called it Shoot the shadow. At first, I thought that meant darkness, something to fear, something to avoid. But Shoot was not a demon. It was a companion, a presence that mirrored you, followed you, held everything you left behind. And when I began to sit with that truth, I realized how much I had left there. Old pain I never voiced, thoughts I judged too quickly, desires I didn't know how to hold, regret, shame, rage, I hid beneath politeness. They were still with me, not gone, just quiet, carried by Shoot. In ancient Egypt, the shadow was not just symbolic, it was part of the soul's architecture. It was believed that the Sheut held your unseen truth, the emotional memory you couldn't name, the patterns you repeated without knowing why. They even believed that the Shoot could act without the body, that it had power, that it could protect you or haunt you, depending on how you treated it. And I began to wonder, how have I treated my shadow? Most of us are taught to hide it, to perform light, to stay positive, to bury our mess beneath smiles and certainty. But Shoot cannot be buried. It only becomes heavier, denser, more restless. In Jungian psychology, this is the shadow self, the parts of us we exile until they rise in ways we can't control, snapping at a friend without warning, sabotaging something good, waking up with a feeling of unease and not knowing why. That is Shiut, asking to be seen. And when I started listening, not judging, just listening, I felt something soften. My shadow was not trying to ruin me. It was trying to protect what I had forgotten. It was holding the grief I never processed, the voice I swallowed, the truth I was not yet ready to say. It was waiting for me to come home to it, and that changed how I moved through the world. Now, when I feel that flicker of discomfort, that tension in my chest or stomach, I do not immediately push it away. I ask, is this Shoot speaking? Not to control me, but to remind me of something real. Because the shadow is not the enemy. It is the teacher that comes last, when all the others have left. And when you welcome it, even gently, you begin to feel whole in a new way. The Egyptians knew that a soul split from its shadow was vulnerable, inauthentic, unready for the journey ahead. But a soul in relationship with its Shiut was balanced, guarded, prepared. And so I began to include my shadow in the conversations I have with myself, not to fix it, but to befriend it, because truth that goes unspoken does not disappear. It becomes Shiut, and it walks with you until you are ready to speak it. In the next part of our journey, we move from shadow to center, to the place where all parts of the soul are weighed, where the heart speaks silently and nothing false can pass. Let us now meet Ib, the heart that remembers and the compass of your soul. There are moments when something in your chest tightens, but it's not physical, it's not fear, it's not love, it's something deeper, a quiet weight. Something is being measured. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul was not judged by words, but by the heart. They called it Ib, not just an organ, not just a feeling, but the very core of your being. The Ib was where your memory lived, where your choices accumulated, where your morality rested, not as ideas, but as truth etched into vibration. And that truth could not be hidden. When a person died, they would stand before Osiris and the 42 divine judges. There was no courtroom argument, no performance. Only this, your ib, was placed on a scale, and on the other side, the feather of Ma'at, truth, balance, cosmic order. If your heart was light, you passed. If it was heavy, you were devoured, not punished, erased. The Egyptians did not fear hell. They feared non-existence. That was their wisdom. A soul out of alignment with truth does not suffer forever. It simply dissolves. That idea stayed with me because it made me realize we all know when our heart is heavy, not metaphorically. Literally, we carry it in our posture, in our breath, in the way we avoid certain mirrors, certain people, certain questions, and we tell ourselves, it's fine, that no one sees. But the ib sees, it records, and unlike the mind, it does not rationalize. It simply remembers. That is why in the Book of the Dead, the negative confession was spoken to the ibi, not as a legal defense, but as a spiritual mirror. I have not stolen. I have not caused pain. I have not betrayed my essence. Each line was not proof for a god, but a reckoning with oneself. So I began to ask, what would my heart say if it were weighed today? Would it rise with truth or sink under avoidance? Not because I did wrong, but because I ignored the call to do right. Would it speak of courage or of convenience? And here's the part that changed me. The Egyptians believed the ib could grow lighter through remembrance, through acts of alignment, through integrity, restored quietly, honestly, consistently. You were never trapped by your past, but you could not outrun it. Either you had to face it. So I started paying attention. When I felt a heaviness in my chest, I asked, what am I holding that I haven't named? Sometimes it was guilt, sometimes shame, sometimes just the fatigue of living too long, outside of what I know is right for me. And slowly, I began to clear space, not by being perfect, but by being willing to say the hard thing, to forgive, to stand still when running would be easier, to tell the truth, even when no one else asked for it. That is what makes the ib light again, not emotion, not positivity, but alignment. And when your heart is light, you begin to move differently. You rest more deeply. You speak more clearly. You stop bargaining with your worth because your ib remembers that you are not here to perform goodness. You are here to embody it. In the next and final part of this journey, we step back to see the whole soul, not just as ancient philosophy, but as a living structure we can return to, a map not only for death, but for the way we live. Let us now begin the return to wholeness. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, there is a feeling that rises in the chest. It is not fear, not sadness, just an ache, soft and hollow, as if something essential has gone missing. I used to think it was stress, lack of sleep, another deadline, but the more I sat with it, the more I realized it was hunger, but not the kind food could fix. It was my soul, fragmented, distracted, starved for something deeper. And suddenly, the wisdom of ancient Egypt felt more urgent than ever, because they saw the soul as a system, ka, ba, hai, shiut, ibi, interdependent, sacred, alive, each part with its own need, its own function, its own truth. But in the modern world, we live as if the soul were a background app, always running, rarely tended to. We chase productivity and call it purpose. We curate images and call it identity. We suppress pain and call it positivity. And the soul begins to splinter. Ka becomes depleted because we pour energy into everything, but never return to stillness. Ba becomes disconnected. Our dreams dry up. Our inner voice grows faint. Ren is confused. We change ourselves to fit roles, not knowing who we are beneath the performance. Shiut is ignored, our shadow denied, until it erupts in self-sabotage. Ib grows heavy because truth has no room. In a life lived too fast, we do not mean to forget, but the forgetting happens anyway because no one teaches us how to feed the Ka, how to welcome the Shiuti, how to remember the Ren. And so, we feel the ache, the low hum of misalignment, the quiet knowing that something is missing, even if we cannot name what. But here is what I've learned. The soul does not ask for perfection. It asks for presence. It asks us to pause, to listen, to name what we've denied. It asks us to begin feeding what we've starved for years, not with theories, but with truth, with acts of alignment, a conversation that feels real, a boundary that frees you, a silence that heals more than noise ever could. I once believed that healing had to be dramatic, a breakthrough, a transformation, but sometimes it begins with a single act of attention, a whispered acknowledgement to yourself. You are still here. You are still whole beneath the noise, and you are still sacred. The Egyptians did not write their sacred texts for gods to read. They wrote them so the soul would not forget its way back. Maybe we need a new kind of Book of the Dead, not for the dead, but for the living, not as an ancient scroll, but as a daily practice to ask each morning, what does my Ka need? What is my Ba trying to show me? Have I spoken my Ren today? Is my Shiut hiding something I am ready to face? And is my Ib still light enough to move forward? Because when we ask these questions, gently, honestly, the soul begins to reintegrate. The parts begin to speak again, and the ache begins to ease. In the final part of this journey, we return to the whole, not as a concept, but as a living, breathing possibility. Let us now rediscover the blueprint within. We often wait for someone else to tell us who we are, a teacher, a mentor, a spiritual guide, a voice louder than our own. But the Egyptians believed you carried the guide within you, not in your mind, but in your soul. They did not wait for salvation. They wrote it, spell by spell, line by line. They created a living map of the unseen, a book of coming forth by day, crafted not to please the gods, but to prepare the self, to remember, to realign, to rise. And now, centuries later, with their scrolls crumbling in museums and their names half pronounced on tours, a quiet invitation still echoes. What if you wrote your own book, not as imitation, but as integration? What if your life was not something to survive, but something to honor as sacred text? Each day, a line, each challenge, a chapter, each truth spoken aloud, a spell of return. Your Ka, longing for rhythm again. Your Ba, seeking space to dream. Your Ren, waiting to be remembered without distortion. Your Shiut, holding wisdom behind the fear. Your Ib, asking you gently, is this who you really are? You do not need ancient ink or divine scrolls. You need only willingness, stillness, and a pen. Try this. Tonight, before sleep, write one line as if it were part of your soul's eternal record. I have not betrayed my own voice today. I remembered who I am beneath the noise. I listened to the shadow without turning away. I honored the energy that keeps me alive. My heart is lighter than it was yesterday. These are not affirmations. They are realignments, lines of code, rewriting the soul's operating system from within. And over time, you will begin to feel it. The ache will soften, the silence will deepen, and the soul, once fragmented, will begin to move as one. That is your real book, not one written for others to read, but for the divine within you to recognize, a scroll of becoming, and you are already writing it, even now. So walk forward gently, with reverence, and when the noise returns, as it always does, pause, And remember, the ancient ones did not fear the dark. They walked through it with words made of light. Now it is your turn to speak, to write, to come forth by day.